My team has 2 designers. When the growth team wants to create some pages, the designers take that design, use Locofy, get the code, pull it into Cursor, just prompt, explain, and then publish it. And maybe an engineer needs 10 minutes to just review. Locofy converts your existing Figma designs into whichever sort of front-end framework, React, Angular, Vue, HTML, CSS, Flutter, React Native, pretty much anything. Cut the time by 70-80%.
Mittal built his own large design models before ChatGPT existed. Spent 4 years on AI that understands visual design, not just text. His company, Locofy, now helps engineers build front-end 2 to 3 times faster.
As we were launching this, ChatGPT launched, and we started hearing this term LLMs. But the more we looked at LLMs, the more we realized the LLM architecture itself makes it super hard, if not impossible, to understand Figma designs. We spent about 4 years building our design models from scratch. We call it the large design models.
You mentioned about maybe 70%, 80% reduction. How long does it take for you to generate?
In code itself, not more than 20 to 30 seconds. An engineer who was able to do 10 designs or 10 screens per month is now able to do 25 to 30. We have customers who have built large projects of 1,000 plus screens in a matter of months using Locofy. And I do believe that designers can do the front-end development, and they have absolutely every reason and all the tools available today to do it. No more business PM, technical PM, lead UX researcher, UI designer, UX designer. Could just be a product manager and a designer.
Hello, welcome back to another new episode of the Tech Day Journal podcast, another in-person recording this time. I have Mittal with me today. He's the CEO and founder of Locofy.ai. Interestingly, it's a tool that can convert like design, maybe Figma design, into working front-end code.
Yep.
I think it's always like a dream of many developers, not having to build front-end UI and all that. So I'm very pleased to have you in the show today, and I hope to learn a lot about Locofy today. So welcome, Hani.
Thanks for having me, Henry. Yeah, good to see this happening in Singapore.
Right. So, Hani, I love to maybe understand a bit more about your background. So maybe looking back from your career, from your past history until now, would you share maybe any kind of learnings or key turning points that you had in your career that we can learn from you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I originally come from the north of India, near the Himalayas, but I've been now in Singapore 20 years. Came here to study at NUS. And I think since you talk about turning points, I think for me, the biggest turning point was the App Store launch. Because I was essentially building Windows mobile apps before the App Store. I was an intern in Microsoft and I picked it up, .NET and everything. And I was building these apps to find location and post it on social media. And I think when the App Store was launched, I think it was a big aha moment. That said, I was still, as a graduate, there were not many startups back in 2009 and 10. So I was just building things just as a hobby. But then I think when the Singapore startup scene kind of started getting a little bit more interesting, around 2012, 13, that's where I think, just like today, people are looking for AI, native engineers, product managers. Back then was more about mobile. And I was one of the few people who had actually built mobile apps in Singapore, no matter how scrappy and looking back at it, how not so good, those apps were. But essentially, I joined Vigo.com, and I think my career took off, I guess, because, I was able to build my own mobile apps for a few $1,000, right? So joining a Series C startup, I had the budgets, but I brought that sort of early stage mentality into the startup. The first engineer I hired in Vigo is today my co-founder.
Oh, nice.
So I think that was also a big turning point, just realizing that I got lucky in terms of hiring. And I started also realizing I was good at hiring, maybe, and attracting the right talent. And seeing just what a 10x engineer meant and can do. And that kind of shaped what we're doing today as well. To your point, we built the first editor's choice app on Google Play from Asia in 2014. And even the Google Play guys came down to Singapore and they were like, we can't believe, you must have 100 people engineering team. And I said, I have one engineer who has never done mobile before. So I think through not just my learnings from my own sort of career, but also I leaned a lot on Sohaib, who's my co-founder's experience as well, because he just went from gaming to mobile apps and just kicked it out of the park. Then we took over web, which we had no idea how to do. And that became interesting. We launched the world's first progressive web app for travel especially. It was showcased at Google I/O, left, right, and center.
Wow.
And I think that's where my co-founder and I, our careers kind of grew really quickly. And we also started realizing that we are very passionate about building amazing experiences, like, irrespective of whether it's mobile, tablet, which framework it is. And that led to where we are today. Starting Locofy about 4.5 years ago was based on the last decade of experience and realizing a lot of companies and engineers either struggle with it or they see it as grunt work. Yet very few people can actually achieve amazing results. And that's where Locofy was born.
Right. So thanks for sharing some of the achievements, the highlights, your past experience. I think it was very cool when you mentioned that you published the first Google Play apps in the store. So I think that's really great. So I think you mentioned about Wago, and I know that in your career you also went to Finacell, right?
Finacell, yeah, and Homage.
And also the other thing is Homage, right?
Yeah.
So 3 startups, but you mentioned in the beginning you were building mobile apps, but then you turned into CPO actually, like product management and all that. So tell us this transition, what makes you transition to product management?
Yeah, so I actually started my career in Credit Suisse.
Okay.
And I realized very quickly that I'm not cut out to work in a large bank. But the good thing over there was I had free time and I used to hustle a lot, right? So I was building my own apps and some people noticed at Credit Suisse and they offered me to build something for Credit Suisse out of my free time. But I just realized how slow it was. And then I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to work in a startup. So that was, I think, a very big turning point. But yeah, I also said, if I go to a startup, I'm not a 10 out of 10 or a 10x engineer. I'm maybe a 7 or 8. And that was a long time ago. And I just realized that what I was really naturally maybe good at, a lot of people started telling me about this and I didn't even know about it, was that, hey, you're a really good product manager. And I was like, what's a product manager? And the more I read about it, the more I started realizing that's essentially what I want to do. And I set myself a goal that by the age of 30, I want to be a product manager. I mean, of course, back then, product managers would not just come straight out of college. It was expected for you to be an engineer for 5-6 years and then have some business sort of sense and spend time with designs. So I set myself that goal and I got a job as a product manager with Vigo purely because of my experience with building mobile apps, being one of the early adopters of building apps. And because I think I led that transformation from a .com to a mobile-first company for Vigo, my career grew and I became a chief product officer very, very quickly before the age of 30. And I just started realizing that's where I can have the most impact. And I was good at, I think, identifying problems and I've gotten better as I've taken more and more challenging problems through Vigo, Finacell, Homage, and today Locofy. So yeah, it was just product management happened because someone told me you're a good product manager. And the more I read about it, yeah, it was just like, yeah, this is who I am. I come from a business family. So I naturally like ownership and solving problems. Yeah, I just started realizing if I can attract the best engineers, which I was able to do early in my career, I started realizing that I can have big impact in companies, owning decisions and owning that, engineering execution essentially. Yeah.
Right. Very inspiring, I think, for people who sometimes felt that, I don't know, for example, if you're an engineer and you feel that engineering is not your world, right? Yeah. So it's worth to take a plunge and try out. Maybe in this case, it's product management. And especially if you have feedback from people telling you, hey, you are good in this area as well, right? So I think it's very inspiring to see that someone can transform their career.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Even setting aside a goal, right, to achieve the role.
I think that's where that comes through family upbringing, I think, basically, right? Like the way I grew up was basically just say yes and then figure it out. Right? So I think that helped me adapt. And I still feel that, yeah, for any young listeners who feel they've done a degree and they don't necessarily enjoy it, if you're young, just try everything. And I've talked to a lot of folks who say, should I do an MBA and then get into product management? And I'm like, no, just build something. Even if it doesn't work out, even if it's, it doesn't go beyond a few hundred users, it will teach you what product management really is that you cannot learn from a book or from just lectures. So yeah, absolutely. Any young people or even mid-career, I would say, in this AI age today, it's becoming easier to find the resources and the tools to pick up new skills and new job descriptions. And job descriptions are getting transformed, as you obviously know. Yeah. So yeah, that's something I still stand by.
Nice. So yeah, I think trying, experimenting, failing, I think it's part of the learning journey and the part of the growth, right? I mean, yeah, it could fail, but it could also succeed, just like what you had. So you mentioned that you have worked in these 3, I would say they are like big, major startups, right? Maybe more scale-ups rather than tiny startups. So what are the key lessons if you can pick, as a product, like a CPO or product manager, what are key lessons that you learn about building product, like great products from these various 3 companies that you have?
I think product management, in the last 5 to 7 years, I've seen a lot of young PMs saying product management is about gathering requirements, writing PRDs. It's not. It's just not. So I think for me, product management is about solving tough problems. And in this case, because we're a part of the tech industry, it's about solving, tough problems that can be solved very efficiently and have massive impact through tech. So I think for me, the biggest learning has been throughout my career, just how to identify the right problems. Because when you have good engineers, there is no shortage for a company to, like in a company to build applications and automations, but not everything is worth it. So I think you always have to keep an eye on A, understanding what impact means, B, I guess, identifying the biggest problems, which is like 1 and 2 are loosely related, and then just building as fast as possible. I've never believed in documentation, which has maybe pissed off a few people that I've worked with in the past. But I always believe, I think just once you know a problem is worth solving, just go build it as quickly as possible. Take some shortcuts if you have to, because it's still a hypothesis at that point of time. Right. And you want to learn whether you're on the right path as quickly as possible and then kind of course correct. Before going too big into like, here's my problem and I'm going to spend 2 years before I get any feedback from users. And number 2, for me, another learning was, I think asking your users for what they want and surveying them and feedbacking is actually overrated. I think sometimes people don't know they might know what they want, but they may not necessarily know that beyond their, needs, there are certain things that can actually have a much bigger impact. And the only way to find out is if you build. Like, for example, in 2007-8, if you ask mobile phone users, what do you want? They would have said a slightly faster, slightly slimmer, more memory, more songs. And then no one would have said, I want an iPhone, like a smartphone and like no keyboard on it. And there's an app store around it. So I think that's what I've realized, that spending time asking users for feedback and hoping that will give you the answer is a bit overrated. People sometimes just say yes because there's no cost to saying, hey, if I build something like this, would you use it? People are like, yeah, sure. And then you spend 6-9 months building it and no one uses it. So I think you just have to become better at reading all the data points around you and using your gut instinct as well. And the more you build, your gut gets stronger, obviously. But choosing the problem is, I would say, the more important part of product management than gathering requirements and documenting it. And I think in the AI age, as writing PRDs and doing surveys is becoming easier, a product manager's job is now even more about identifying the right problems where you may not even have the data, or you have the data but it doesn't necessarily point you towards, hey, go and do this. So I think that's where a product manager should be first a problem solver, and problem solving requires you choose the right problems and then solve it the right way. So go down to the basics basically.
Right. I think very good key points that you mentioned. So first, of course, you need to identify the problems that you want to solve, understand the impact, right? So problems and impact kind of like correlate with each other. Yeah. So you want to solve bigger impact problem, I would say, and not like small impact problems. And then obviously build fast as much as necessary, validate it with users, sometimes use your gut. I think I remember when you mentioned about this, I remember Henry Ford's quote, right? So if I asked people what they wanted back then, they wanted like a faster horse, not a car. So I think that reminded me of that quote. So throughout those 3 key experiences, do you have an example where you actually have to pivot? So for example, from, okay, I identify this is the problem I want to build, but over the time after you release it maybe, or get feedback from users, you actually have to pivot, solving slightly more tangential problems. So is there such examples that you can share maybe?
Yeah, I think the most recent one I would say was around Locofy itself. Okay. So when we started Locofy, I think we were very clear that design to code is a big problem. And I think, look, today it's quite hot, I would say, and everyone agrees with it. But back in 2021, early pre-ChatGPT, pre-Stable Diffusion, pre-Copilot, to think you can go from design to code was considered a little bit crazy. And my co-founder and I were also a little bit naive in thinking we can do it for any design tool to any code framework very quickly. Doing the first step, building the MVP, is easier. Getting it into production is super difficult. And it takes a lot of investment, obviously, and a lot of focus. So I think for us, the pivot started from, we were app builders, right? So we were like, let's do building iOS apps and Android apps can be easy from designs or from design tools. And we had to almost like say, hey, do we build our own design tool in this case? No, let's not like reinvent the wheel. We will go with the existing design tool. And we did a simple website where people could sign up. And we just started realizing just how big not only web was, but also I think it was a turning point of, web-based mobile app frameworks like, obviously Flutter, React Native becoming a lot more popular.
Yeah.
And we said, it's okay. Let's just do web first, and maybe in 6 months we'll do native iOS and Android. 4.5 years later today, we still haven't started working on it. Just because I think once you launch something, so to my point earlier about like, surveys and asking users, that was more about like doing something before you build. But once you kind of like launch your core problems first, prototype or MVP, after that, I think we just got so much feedback that our path became a lot more clear that we are going to be a web first, design to code platform, front end development platform, rather than just like app building that we initially thought about. And of course, we will go and build that. But that was the first major sort of pivot. Second one was even though we were clear AI will play a big role, the early few prototypes and the first few MVPs and all was a lot of heuristics. And there were engineers in the teams who believed that you can solve this problem with heuristics. But I think we started seeing patterns, and then we started building our own design models. The way and how quickly that has happened, and now how much of our, not just revenue, but the core product sort of depends on it, I would not have anticipated or predicted that 4.5 years back. We thought AI would play a support role, like some basic tasks of going from design to code, picking up assets, making them work across different browsers, making them work across different sort of form factors, maybe identifying some buttons and inputs. But today it's like one click basically to go from design to code. And that looks completely different from what we initially thought in the early days. And I think that's where that feedback of having something out in the open is a lot more valuable than asking people through like a form itself. Yeah.
Again, like I think everyone who has built product would have the same opinion, I would say, right? Because once you throw something out in the market, right, the market will kind of determine exactly what products, and I think you will pivot along the way, right? So I think I've heard a lot of product companies that turn to successful, right? The initial story is kind of like different from what they're doing now.
Oh yeah, I mean, one more thing that I forgot to mention is when we started the company, we said we'll never do enterprise. Like we will just be a bunch of engineers, product managers, like have a $20 subscription, and you know how everyone starts, right? Like I just need 1 million people buying a $20 subscription and never have a salesperson. But today we are fully enterprise. Like 90% of our business is enterprise. And yeah, we just started realizing, I think I would say early to mid last year, that enterprises or enterprise engineers were using Locofy in free beta. They started asking us, hey, we love Locofy, but we can't use it in production in the company because we need a security audit and like you need to have a proper pricing. We can't use free tools. And initially we kept saying, sorry, no, we don't even have a salesperson, right? Like whatever, you can use the tool for free. If not, no problems. And as we started benchmarking things across individual developers and enterprises, it just hit us on our face, and we're like, we are an enterprise company, whether we like it or not. The data suggests so, qualitative and quantitative. And today we are like a fully enterprise company. 1.5 years ago, I actually told some investors I'll never do enterprise. And today they're like, wait, what happened? Right? So, which is just part and parcel of obviously building a startup, right? Like you can have an end goal in mind, but the path you take to get there will never be a straight line. Yeah.
So I think this is also a good segue for people who haven't heard about Locofy, right? I think we have mentioned some interesting pivots that you've done with Locofy, but in the first place, maybe if you can explain what Locofy is, like what kind of proposition that it has, what is the cool thing about Locofy?
Yeah, I mean, in very simple terms, part of the product development journey when you build a website or mobile app or dashboards or anything, internal, external, is you spec out something, you design it in simple terms, and then those designs are obviously done on tools like Figma, which is very popular. There are other examples like Sketch, Adobe XD from a decade ago, Penpot for open source community. And these designs are done by designers. And then once, let's say, the stakeholders have kind of agreed to the design, it goes to engineers. Engineers, very, very like simplifying, I guess it's just front-end, back-end engineers. Let's say front-end guys are more focused on bringing your designs to life through code. And back-end engineers build everything, infrastructure, back-end servers, and security. And the list is obviously very long. We only focus on the automation of front-end itself because we've seen in like a decade plus of our experience that as much as front-end development seems easy, your design's ready, why not just have it ready in a couple of days? It's where 60 to 70% of our time and our best engineers' time was going. And yeah, so we just thought, let's automate as much of that as possible directly from the design. So in short, Locofy converts your existing Figma designs and Penpot designs and Adobe XD designs into whichever sort of front-end framework, React, Angular, Vue, HTML, CSS, Flutter, React Native, pretty much anything. And how it does that is we built our own proprietary technology. We call it the large design models because LLMs actually don't solve this problem. So we kind of trained our own models, deep learning techniques to go from designs to front-end code. We're not a no-code app. A lot of people think we're a no-code app builder. We're not. We're a low-code builder. We give you the code, but that's not complete. It's not the full app. Obviously, you have to then go and refine it further and potentially like add, your APIs and back-end logic. So Locofy is essentially a tool for front-end engineers, full-stack engineers, anyone who's actually involved in building the front-end to cut the time by 60, 70, 80% by going from designs to a pixel-perfect, developer-friendly, responsive and interactive replica of that design rather than having to build it from scratch. Once you get that code, we have integrations into, the cursors of the world, into GitHub, VS Code, so that you can easily pull that code and keep merging it and integrate it continuously beyond that point. Yeah, so what we stand for is building amazing experiences with less effort and freeing up designers from engineers, especially from grunt work of writing UI code from scratch and letting them focus on the tougher front-end and back-end problems. Yeah.
Right. Maybe a bit of trivia. I would assume Locofy here stands for low code DeFi.
Yes.
Is that correct?
When we started the company, I think low code, no code was still a kind of nascent industry. And when I said we are going to do design to code to one of my investors, he's like, oh, low code. And I was like, what is that term? I've never heard of it. So I started researching. And I think low code became like, for a couple of weeks, we were just saying low code so much that low code started becoming a little bit of a possibility. And like Loco.ai would be nice. And it's a kind of crazy that we're doing a startup. And Loco obviously means crazy. So we looked for Loco.ai, but someone had it. And then we were like, hey, Shopify is pretty big. And there was this trend of like adding "ify" in the end of everything.
Right.
So we just called it Locofy.
I see. Okay. I like that thinking process. So obviously it's very promising, right? Everyone who has seen Locofy website, I assume they will be thrilled, right? Oh, from sketches you can turn it into
Correct.
code, right? And you mentioned pixel perfect. But how much pixel perfect it is? Because sketch can be anything, right? From your visuals, colors, maybe even animation, I don't know, into code. How much, like, is it 100% accurate or is it like how much?
That's an amazing observation. You're obviously an engineer. So currently about 80 to 85% of screens that are converted using Locofy do a 95% plus pixel perfect representation. We basically look at every node, every layer. Once we render the code that Locofy produces, and then we match it against the design to see how many of those elements have moved or don't look the same. But yeah, how easy is it is a different story because that depends a lot on how your designs have been structured. Right. And to your point, right, like designs can be anything, and Figma became popular because of freeform, like, people can coordinate and like work together, multiple people can collaborate and build a design together. Yeah. But there was no real importance, I think, in the past about how you structure those Figma layers and nodes. Whether you belong to the 80-85% of accurate code, pixel perfect code or not, depends on not just how beautiful your designs are, more how they are structured. and especially to do with like, removing unnecessary layers and nodes, grouping things properly so that there's a relationship between them, using best practices like auto layout, naming your layers properly. If you do that, then the chances are you'll save 70 to 80% of your time, as we continuously see with our enterprise customers. When we go and train them, before we even train them on how to use Locofy, we first train them on how to structure your design, setting up your design files. Just like any AI, right? Like the input and output are related to each other. And if garbage goes in, then garbage comes out. So I think that's where Locofy does a tremendous job with people who are either already following the best practices on their Figma designs or sketch designs, or for the folks who say this is a big enough problem, I can invest a little bit time up front. Maybe half a day of my designer's time can save me 4 days of my engineer's time. That obviously equation is quite hard to say no to. So it really depends on the input itself. And then the second part of it depends on how our models have been created. We spent about 4 years building our design models from scratch. And they are a combination of, people mistake them for, so which LLMs are you using? And the answer is, it's a completely different architecture. It's not based on language, it's based on visual understanding of designs. So whether it's to do with the design structure, whether it's to do with identifying, HTML elements, interactive elements, buttons, input tags, hundreds of them. Identifying the libraries, right? Because you could be using Material and Bootstrap or your own design system. Then responsiveness, which is one of the toughest problems. That again goes back to how well your designs are structured, how it behaves on mobile, desktop, and tablet. Relationships have to be formed and identified between each element on your desktop website for it to work. So it really comes down to the quality of input. And that's why we're doing really well with enterprises, I would say, more than the individual engineers today. Because individual engineers like things to just happen very fast. And then they also don't want to go into designs and structure those designs. Whereas in enterprises, we talk to teams together and we organize the trainings and workshops, which enterprises are used to, and they see massive benefits of investing some time into designs because their roadblock is never designs, it's always engineering. Whereas in young startups, I think engineers, like I said, don't want to go into Figma design and change things. And until they do that, they won't save any time. And most of them will say, I can do this page in 2 days myself. If I have to then invest an hour finding who the designer is, convince them to make the changes, then it doesn't work. Whereas in enterprises, we talk to teams where it works out because there's a common denominator, generally the VP of design, VP of engineering, who sees the benefit of doing this.
Well, I think that's a great insight, right? Because like now that you mention it, of course, if you're a few people startup, right, you don't have proper Figma design and all that. And so I think that perfectly makes sense why you go into enterprise, right? Or like a bigger technologies organization setup, I would say, where you have designers and engineers, right?
That one learning was, I would say, the biggest reason for our pivot towards enterprises. Because initially we were like, people will just do designs properly. And we do a demo and people are like, oh, this is great. But when I try it on my design, it doesn't work. And we say, when we investigate, your design files are not done in a certain way. And then we would do videos and we do trainings and workshops and everything. But individual engineers, they don't like to do all of this maybe. But with enterprises, we started realizing that when we were running an open beta, the larger teams would take interest, would come in like groups of 10. We would run like a 1-hour workshop. And then they would start reporting that they're saving a lot of time. And we started just realizing there's a clear sign over here that larger enterprises are okay investing the time up front because they have the designer engineers all together. And for a long time, we thought Figma itself would, launch tools to optimize designs, and they did in pieces here and there. We partnered with them, we gave them that feedback as well. But it still remains to be one of the biggest problems with design to code.
Right.
People who expect it to work like magic will very likely be disappointed. But folks who've invested the time into the prerequisites have seen massive improvements and massive time saving overall.
Right. So that means after hearing what you explained, right, definitely it doesn't just use a visual analysis, right? It also analyzes the Figma design itself, the metadata, the structure and all that. And then you also mentioned that the team most likely has a designer and engineering setup, right? So that typical setup. But one question remains. So you mentioned about, maybe 70%, 80% reduction. How long does it take, like, for me to submit Figma files or click one button? How long does it take for you to generate
The code itself? Yeah, I mean, not more than 20 to 30 seconds.
Wow. Okay.
And you can select even 3 or 4 screens in the same go. We have customers who have built large projects of 1,000+ screens in a matter of months using Locofy. And I think in the background, there's just maybe like 7 to 10 different models running. One is to optimize the design, one goes and finds those HTML elements, the other one goes and looks for responsiveness, and another one says, hey, let me find all the libraries and custom components you have. The other one says, hey, there's some repetition, let me break your design into smaller reusable components. The other one goes and breaks it into what are the props, for example. But all of these happen in parallel and they never take more than a few seconds, actually. Wow. Yeah. The time is actually spent on the pre-Locofy. So, like I said again, right, you invest half an hour into cleaning up your design the right way. Locofy itself doesn't take much time. And of course, like beyond the initial code generation, it will make some mistakes. So we provide editor tools where you probably spend another half a day or whatever. But yeah, the equation that we have seen with some of our customers reporting back numbers is that an engineer who was able to do 10 designs or 10 screens per month is now able to do 25 to 30 after the initial sort of learning curve. But yeah, we want to bring it down, obviously, even more. I don't think people complain about the 20, 30 seconds it takes. It really comes down to the initial code that gets generated. If it's too far away from what you have in mind, you're not going to invest the 20% time to make it better. So it really comes down to doing all the pre-checks and everything. And that's where we are innovating a lot more right now, because we are realizing that it's still 9 out of 10 organizations are not really doing designs a certain way. And we're teaching them, but we can also automate that part as well. Yeah.
Nice. So you mentioned in the beginning about building this model, right? And I think 4.5 years ago, LLM was not the craze as we have now. So basically your path is actually really like building the traditional ML, right? Like using neural network and all that. So tell us about the decision, the rationale, why you need to build your own model. And after the LLM comes in, do you even try, using the LLM whether it can solve the problem?
Amazing observation. Yeah. So we launched our first beta product in 2022 Jan. And in there, we had a very simple model. Well, okay, the first initial alpha version, you would have to select, let's say, a button in the design and say, this is a button, and then add its properties, and then select one other one. Because your human eyes can look at a rectangle that says buy now, and anyone can say that's a button, but it's just a designer's vector that constitutes a button. The engineer would still have to write the code for it. So we said, okay, let's make it this way. The designer or the engineer just selects that rectangle and say this is a button, and we'll automate the code for that. We started doing that and we realized, hey, you know what? We have a lot of data. Can we train maybe like an image-based model or a CNN to understand? Because, I mean, if it's a rectangle, it can be a button, input, datetime picker. All of them have a text and an icon and a rectangle. But if we have enough data and we can kind of like train certain of these CNNs and transformers were kind of new back then as well, maybe we can get some results. And in the initial days, we were like, it's kind of doing the job. It spits out and says it's a button or input or datetime picker. But that's already better than asking a user to do it manually. So it was initially in our V1, it was more of a auto suggest. You select a rectangle or a Figma node and we'll say, hey, we think this is a button, 80% sure about it. But it could also be a datetime picker, which is like 60%. And they just had to say yes or no, right? So that's how we started doing it. And the more our customers did it, and in free beta, we told our users as well that you're going to use this data anonymized to train our models. The more we started doing that, the more we are like, hey, if we are hitting 90% accuracy, do we even need to suggest? Can we just not go and do it? So that was the first sort of AI that we started building on. It was purely for tagging, understanding buttons, input, datetime pickers, switches, headers, footers. The second one came around design optimizations, when we started realizing that we have to remove these unnecessary layers and groups and nodes. We started seeing some patterns and we said, hey, there are certain graph neural networks that can potentially help over here. Another one was around, these were just like 3 or 4 different models for very specific things. We saw patterns with our customers' data and talking to them as well. Another one was in the design, a designer says frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, but in the actual design, it's maybe like a carousel. So in code, you don't want to call it frame 1, frame 2, frame 3. You want to call it something else more useful. So for that, before ChatGPT was launched, actually, we were using OpenAI, right? So we'd heard of transformer models, and there were a bunch of APIs we could call at that point of time. So we started sending this information and saying frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, and this is the image. Tell me what this could be. And they come back and say, this could be actually a city card, or it could be like a country carousel, whatever. We started naming the layers properly using that. And the more we started like building our own, sort of training our own models, different techniques, like we use a combination of transformer models, obviously sequence to sequence, YOLO, XG, Boost, tons of them. And it was all experimental. There was a hypothesis that, look, this is all more image-based, so maybe give it like a CNN sort of a thing. And the more we started automating these smaller tasks, we started realizing that a user who clicks hundreds of times to go from design to code, maybe 80 of them, we can just go ahead and do it for them. And then instead of asking them to do it manually and learn from it only, we just go ahead and do it and then give them editor tools and see which ones they change, which ones are not right. And that helped us also learn slightly faster and made the experience tremendously better. As we were launching this, ChatGPT launched. And we started hearing this term LLMs. And we're like, great, like if it can help us with design to code, great, because we're not in the business of building a model and competing. We want to solve front-end engineering, design to code problem. But the more we looked at LLMs, the more we realized the LLM architecture itself makes it super hard, if not impossible, to fine-tune it or to prompt it to understand Figma designs. Because it's not built, it's built on understanding language and trying to predict the next word. Yeah. There's a certain structure to that. For designs, it's completely free-form. Just because there's a button doesn't mean necessarily it will always be next to a carousel or next to a header. LLMs struggled to understand that, but LLMs solved some parts of the problem. So we're like, okay, the majority of understanding designs, we have to build our own design models, but we'll use LLMs as and when we can use them, and we continue doing so even today. But in our case, going from design to code is about, I would say, 80 to 85% of it is how well we build these specialized models using any techniques really, and combine them together with LLMs. So for example, you go from design to code, LLMs may not understand designs very well, but once we spit out the code, LLMs actually understand code really well. So if Locofy gives out the code for a form that looks like a flight search form, we could actually ask an LLM to write the logic for it. And that's where we started saying, okay, you know what? Design to code is not just a matter of like click a button, get the code and go on with it. It's more about reducing 80% of the more, things that can be automated, where we can see a pattern, get it to code, and then see what LLMs can do with it. Potentially build our own vibe coding functionality. But then we started saying, hey, there's an MCP protocol, it's kind of becoming bigger. And the likes of Cursor, Windsurf are already investing so much with amazing minds to add functionality, code reviews, all the non-UI part. Then maybe that's the best marriage possible, right? Design to code with Locofy, and from code to more functionality and everything with LLMs. So the way we look at it is, rather than say LLMs or not, we think about what would an engineer do at this step. Can we automate some parts of that problem? To automate that part of the problem, is it an LLM that can do it, or our own models? And we go and build that, rather than just say we are just going to build an LLM vibe coding tool because it's hot right now. So it's about breaking the problem into sub-problems and seeing where what fits.
Wow. So thanks for sharing all this. I don't know how much is proprietary, but I think we get a peek into internal.
We actually have written a research paper about it. It's public, so.
Right.
Yeah. So the design models part is proprietary, but we are very open about sharing how we build them here.
Nice. So maybe a little bit diving slightly deeper, right? So when you mentioned you help front-end engineering to come up with, like the first draft of the code, I assume, right? So what's the stop? Like you produce a code, you have the visual elements, UI elements and all that, I assume. And you have hook points, I guess, like where the developers now come in to put it in the logic, or do you also fill in the logic and integrate with something,
No, currently, first version was just we give you the code, you export it and gone. Then we built a web app where you could view the code and you can kind of added some editor tools for you to change a few things. Then we started realizing that our customers, what do they do after they download the code? They figure out a way to open it in VS Code and add functionality. So we built a VS Code extension where with one command you can just pull that code and continue working on the code that Locofy produces. And lately, obviously, with the cursor and everything, we have an MCP where you can just convert a design to code, go to cursor and say, hey, using my Locofy MCP, pull that code that I've generated for my flight homepage, add accessibility, clean it up, make the carousel functional. So that does beyond the front end itself. And we have integrations to GitHub as well, because you may be just building a small component or a section and push it directly to the right repo. And we then build a way for you to do continuous integration. So if you change something on the design, Locofy will identify that change and you will still make the choice of whether you want to just auto merge it or replace the older version of the code, and kind of give you a three-way editor on GitHub to also select. So you can kind of keep going back because designs keep changing a lot. We are considering whether there are still some parts that we can do an LLM integration on the code that is generated before it goes into VS Code and other places, where it's purely related to the UI that we can provide more tools and maybe an LLM integration. But yeah, that's still something in the works. So we do only front end, and we make sure that that code is connected to your design system, connected to your designs, connected to your code repo and your developer tools, to provide like a very seamless way of not just doing it one time, but also coming back to it again and again.
Yeah, I think the cycle, the loop here is very cool, right? Because many people would just assume, okay, you turn into code and that's it. You just, take it and, transform things. But we know that design change, sometimes user feedback gives like a certain, changes to the design, right? And you have to iterate, right? I think it's really cool that you have all these integration points. And
Yeah. So for example, like, merging code is something LLMs are amazing at.
Yeah.
And that's why we use LLMs. Adding accessibility, we were like, rather than we build a feature, actually LLMs do a really good job at it. Like we said earlier, right? Like we see it as an end-to-end problem of automating front end. Whether it requires us to build it using our proprietary models or LLMs, we don't necessarily care. So if LLMs get better at it, good for us. Why build something that will be anyway, base model is already better than what we are spending 6 months on. But we also know LLMs cannot understand designs the same way it can understand legal jargon and create something from scratch itself. Yeah.
So definitely, I think people who have heard this will be very interested, especially front-end engineers, right? We are always very lazy translating design into code. You mentioned about what LLM is good at and what LLM is not good at. For other people who are also solving maybe a slightly similar problem where they think maybe LLM can solve the problem but not quite right, what's a tipping point where you see like LLM is good at what and LLM is not good at what? Maybe you can give some suggestions based on your experience.
Look, I won't claim to say I can make you a list of things it's not good at and things it is good at. But we understand obviously our space the most. And the answer lies to experimentation, right? Like if you think your problem can be solved with LLMs or can't be for that matter, best to just run some experiments and see what it may be. You might get surprised by how good it is in some things that you never thought were possible, and vice versa as well. And I think for us, the more we study LLMs in the underlying architecture itself and how it works, how does like this technology work? When I ask ChatGPT to do something, what does it even follow? What technology it's built on? I think that's where we realize and we're like, there's absolutely no reason why a design would follow the same patterns as a research paper or code or books or tweets or posts, which is where LLMs shine. And that's what it was built for. But I think just purely based on that knowledge itself, if you're building, let's say, a legal tech company, LLMs will obviously do really well. Wherever there's the language and text and sentence structure plays a big role, LLMs are obviously amazing. In the design context, they're still good in terms of producing patterns that have been built in the past. So asking an LLM to, for example, design a wallet, it can design a wallet for you because there are hundreds of wallets in the world and it's been trained on all of them. But if you design that same wallet in Figma, the input changes completely. It's actually a a JSON format. I mean, you obviously know how Figma nodes and layer structures work. That's where LLMs are just not made to understand that sort of parent-child hierarchy that looks more like a graph than like a sentence itself. Or that's at least our understanding of it, right? So, yeah, I mean, but at the same time, like I've seen folks doing really, really well, essentially copywriting anything around marketing, creating images. LLMs are obviously amazing. Using the agentic sort of frameworks, you're starting to see a lot more of these menial tasks of going from one tab, selecting something on your website, clicking it and buying it for you. But solving fundamental problems that require a different mindset or a different architecture than LLMs, of course, it can't. The newer models are starting to do specific things decently well. We can fine tune, for example, an LLM today to make it understand the relationship between parent, child, and child up to a level of n minus 3. Anything beyond that, we see the results are quite crazy or super expensive, super slow. So I think in the context of design to code, I can just say that LLMs work for, let's say, understanding naming, potentially changing the code from, let's say, React to Angular, but then understanding designs itself is something where it struggles. Yet, a lot of people are still, I think, they're going in with the hopes of like LLMs just solve every goddamn problem in the world. So let me just try it. And it maybe works with some basic websites, but that's where we are hearing from our customers as well that it doesn't understand it. We have copyright issues on top of that. We're not necessarily sure if it produces that wallet. Can someone claim it was their wallet design that, now a large company that cares about its reputation will be obviously against? So yeah, I would say it really depends, man. It depends on the problem you are solving. Do experiments. Don't put all your eggs in just the LLM basket. And in most times, what you'll realize is it solves some problems. And then that's where the quality of how you fine tune it, but also fill that last mile gap, let's say, by building your own either heuristics or deep learning techniques. I think that's where the future of solving problems with LLMs is going to be. That the initial POC and all looks very easy with the LLM, but as you go deeper, you have to build, models around it, or wrappers around it to kind of get the results. Yeah. I'm not sure if I answer this question very well actually, because it's just evolving so quickly. But also, I think there's a lot more chatter now about the limitations of LLMs around the world. It doesn't understand how humans think how the world works, and that's why I think there's a lot of chatter around how LLMs cannot alone solve AGI, for example. And we'll have to think of a completely new way rather than just think scaling laws. Just give the LLM as much information and more compute, and it will get better. There's recently news about even to get marginal improvements on LLM accuracy, you'll have to get 10 to the power 100, that much sort of source of energy to even get that marginal improvement, which Earth even doesn't have. So I think, LLMs are going to start hitting a wall, rather a ceiling. For us, we hit that ceiling a long time ago with design to code. But I think a lot of other startups that are betting big on it will find through their own experiments, which we are not very well obviously aware of.
Right. Yeah, so I think from various conversations I had with people who are expert on AI, so they also think that using the current LLM transformer approach may not be the path to AGI. But I mean, who knows? Like this field, changes so rapidly. Every a few days we will see new advancements. But yeah, thanks for sharing your perspective. So I assume building the large design model is partly one of the most complex engineering tasks that you have. Is there any other thing that is unintuitively complex as well for us to, maybe learn about from your experience?
Yeah, I guess I've already touched upon it, but right now I think the biggest problem in the design to code space, not just for Locofy, and the biggest opportunity as well, while there's a lot of chatter around, hey, not only designers, but anyone can design. And do you even need Figma? You can just go to Lovable, Bolt, and just design something. It's absolutely true. It solves a lot of use cases. But we still think, we obviously have a strong bias towards advanced production products will require proper designs and not just an LLM producing the same results that your competitor can get as well. It's becoming commoditized. And what happens when everyone has the same looking website and app is that people go back to saying, I will do it very custom made, and designers become cool, and design tools still have very much stay relevant and continue growing strong actually. So that's where we still think that the problem I mentioned earlier about design structure, it holds the key to a lot of the front end automation around. And that is one of the toughest problems to solve, because design structure, there are some patterns that can be automated, but even if you automate 80% and the remaining 20% doesn't work, for the user to even identify which part of my design is in that 20% that didn't work is one of the problems we are working on right now. And we think once we can get there, design to code can become a lot more mainstream because of the dependency. And I think especially with this notion of like, why should I do the work as a designer if the engineer benefits from it? If we can get the designers' existing designs as they are without any requirements for them to go and manually restructure it, to then go and restructure it within automation, and then design to code works really well, that I think will be the toughest problem in the industry, and I think definitely for what we stand for.
Yeah. Since you brought it up, I think it's also a good point to discuss about it, right? Because in the industry, with the introduction of AI, almost every engineers are kind of like concerned about their role, right? In this case, for your particular use cases, like designers and front-end engineers, right? So now I would imagine designers have the ability to produce code in some sense, and maybe they can tweak it along the way. And for front-end engineers, they have design capability as well, right? But obviously, some people are concerned, like, oh, does it mean we have lesser need for designers and front-end engineer? What do you think about, the future of development, engineering,
Yeah, and this is a topic I'm very, very passionate about as well. My co-founder and I did a talk at Figma Config called "The Rise of the Design Engineer" just 4 months ago. So I do believe that there are going to be changes, and the changes are already kind of happening live, right? Still I'm not still 100% convinced on some of these claims made that no more designers are needed and then designers can do front-end engineering. But I do generally agree with the notion that designers can do the front-end development, and they have absolutely every reason and all the tools available today to do it. The reason is simply because if you look at a designer, they do the designs and then they give it to engineers, and then traditionally 2 months, 3 months later, the engineer would come back and say, hey, I've built it, send it back to the designer, and then the designer goes, this is nowhere close to what I designed. And then that back and forth between designers and engineers to essentially produce the same thing. But for the designer, what it means is frustration that was my vision of what I wanted to design. And then I have to keep talking to this engineer and try to get it to work that way. And they want ownership. So when we've talked to designers, we've said, look, for the designers who are using Locofy, at least, this is what they tell us, that I'm not an expert at front end, but I understand front end techniques enough. And secondly, I use it because I get that code and I can make sure that that code, when it runs on the user side, is actually showing exactly the design I designed through code. Whereas earlier I had to kind of rely on the engineer. So I think, that's why we think that the designer's role will evolve and should evolve. Also for the other reason that if you look at the last 15 years or so, engineering salaries have tripled, quadrupled because there's a shortage of developers. Designers, on the other hand, I think there's enough supply of designers. I have never heard of a company dying because, hey, I never found a designer, right? There's a spectrum, right? Really good designers are still difficult, but you can find designers with a lot more ease, and that's why designers' salaries have not grown anywhere compared to engineers in the last decade. And now with design automation coming up, I think designers feel even more like squeezed from both sides. That there's a lot of designers, and how come I'm not getting a seat at the table? My salaries are not rising. And the second thing is now, oh, whoa, hold on. The role of a design intern can now be done by, like Figma and Stitch, for example. There's so many tools, UiZard or Wizard as it's called. So I think for designers, it's almost, I think, inevitable that they will end up owning more, partly because of the need for them to kind of own the front end, and partly because they themselves realize that, I need to be doing more. I need to be having more impact. And today I have the tools, so why not? But of course, it will still require them to have, learn some front-end expertise, because no AI is magic where it works until it works. But when it breaks, you need to know where it broke and even realize how to fix it after that. So that's where I've been urging at least the designers in my team to start learning front-end concepts. Not be like front-end gurus, but at least understand concepts enough that if they're using a tool, they don't feel scared. They can own it, and they don't have to keep going to engineers to keep asking for help. So I think from design engineering point of view, I feel there's already a revolution, but it doesn't mean that the really experienced, high functioning designers who build complex systems should worry about this automation, because this automation is just producing, like in Japan, there's a term called wabi sabi, right? Which is, look, if everyone in your neighborhood, all your friends have the same table from IKEA, then you kind of want to make something custom made, right? And I think that's essentially what's going to happen with a lot of these design automations, that real designers and advanced design tools will still be very much hot and in demand. On the engineering side, I do feel that always been full stack engineers. But I think there was a time when having just front end engineers and back end engineers made sense. I do think the lines will blur a little bit over there. So I don't think of it as like jobs will go away, but team sizes and roles and responsibilities, I think, will merge a little bit. I mean, Figma did it to a large extent. If you think about it, product managers and designers started designing together, and they brought them kind of close to each other. What we are doing can bring designers and front end engineers very close to each other. And what Cursor kind of does allows front end engineers to do more full stack. So it's less of replacing people and more of like giving them the opportunity to make themselves more full stack. That's, I think, something, yeah, it's inevitable. And product managers as well, not just writing specs. You can solve your problems, do the analysis, create the first mock-up, even if it's done using LLM and everyone gets the same result. It's enough to get an approval, for example. Then design it again from scratch, right? So versus earlier, a product manager would go to a lead UX researcher to go do the research, a business PM to write the business use case, then a designer to do the design, and that would just slow them down. Today, I think any product manager should absolutely be 100% into AI, and rather than having 10 in the team, you can have probably 2 or 3. So yeah, I think roles will transform, but I don't think it's going to be as crazy as it sounds, that proper jobs will just completely be wiped out.
I think one key message I would say that there will be more blending of skill set, right? So most likely the adjacent thing, right? So designer and front-end engineer, maybe front-end engineer with design and back-end, right? So definitely people need to upskill themselves and play around with these tools, right? So I like the term design engineer that you mentioned. Maybe one day we'll start seeing more roles, design engineer, right?
My team has 2 designers. When the growth team basically wants to create some pages for SEO, AIO, for whatever, right? Now the designers take that design, use Locofy, get the code, pull it into Cursor, just prompt, explain, and then publish it. And maybe an engineer needs 10 minutes to just review. So we're already freeing up the engineer's time from slightly lower value tasks so they can focus on the core problems itself. And we are now starting to say, we don't have a product manager, for example. Our solution architects are the product managers. They can write. I mean, writing a PRD I've never considered as product management, but they're talking to customers. Why should there then be a product manager? The more number of people you add, the more the complexity, right? So our solution architects who help customers with their training and workshops can also come back and work directly with our designers and engineers. So I think, yeah, these unnecessary roles that have been created during the height of the pandemic, I think, will go back. No more business PM, technical PM, lead UX researcher, UI designer, UX designer. Could just be a product manager and a designer. So I think that's where things will be just more efficient and faster.
Yeah. So I think it was also brought up in one of my conversation before, right? So we used to have specialization simply because like almost every part of the software engineering is like very complex, right? So if you think about it, right? So front end itself, you have so many frameworks. You have to understand maybe JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever that is. You have to understand the tools, the ecosystem and all that. It becomes like very complex and you need specialized skills. And now with maybe the help of AI, right? So the specialization becomes blurry and it's turning into more generalization. This is where the trend is going as well, I believe. And I would say that people need to be able to play around with these tools, which is my next question. With so many proliferation of tools, you have maybe low code, no code, you have AI-driven tools, right?
Like 15,
Well, what's the future of this? Actually, I'm sometimes very confused, like where should we invest our effort and time?
Yeah. I don't like to make bold predictions as if I know what's going to happen. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have predicted a tool like Cursor, for example. I do think that engineering will become a lot more about some generalists who can do the work to get to a decision, to get to a point where, I mean, in large organizations, it's not just that engineering is complex, it's also about getting people aligned on something. So I think over there, I think the hundreds of tools that require and like generalists can go in and absolutely should. But I think it'll be a combination of some sort of like a chat GPT for research, for example. There's many tools out there, obviously, that can do that. Something like a Miro, Figma, Lovable, Bolt to do the initial sort of converting ideas into some sort of visuals. Because people tend to, when you talk, like six people talk about a homepage, you're all imagining different things, but a design essentially gets everyone to be looking at the same thing and align and make decisions. Beyond that, I think with a design tool that can help bring design and front end together makes a ton of sense. And I think obviously like a Cursor, Windsurf, Copilot, for example, right, may not necessarily be your solution to everything, but things like code reviews, I think writing the logic with auto-suggest for certain things that you've designed already, that's where I think the Cursors and the Windsurfs of the world obviously makes a lot of sense. I'm not very familiar with the backend side of things. I obviously am a front-end guy. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that there will be certain tools that will transform how you've done things in the past. I don't think there will be one tool to rule them all. It will be a combination depending on your use case. So in the enterprise side, if you're part of an innovation team and you're just producing things very quickly, use a Lovable or a Bolt, for example. But if you're building a production grade app, that may not be your answer. It could be a combination of like a Locofy plus Cursor. Yeah. So the same organization might end up having a stack of tools rather than just invest into one and say it will solve all your problems. And I think eventually a couple of winners will emerge and they will start either merging, acquiring, or getting into these spaces. But I think to think that one platform to rule it all or just one tool today that works today will be the tool you use in 10 years from now, no one knows, right? Yeah. You try Cursor today and then Windsurf gets better tomorrow. And then one LLM doesn't work today and then all of a sudden Claude comes out and works well. And people say ChatGPT, the OpenAI models are not working well, but then we try the actual models and it works. No one knows what the real answers are. But I think the key is experimentation and the key is also giving the tools you've chosen a little bit more time because it always starts with initial excitement. Initially, it looks really good. Then a learning curve. And that's when you realize, oh, it's not what I thought it would be because I have to do a certain amount of things and there's a learning curve over there. Yeah. So I would just say I advise people against every month trying 5-6 new tools. But yeah, do your research, find a couple of tools that work for you. Define the grunt work that either your team doesn't like or you don't have the right people for. Start with that and then eventually start kind of growing.
Yeah, from my experience as well, like what you mentioned, right? So with so many different tools, different models, different whatever, right? So I think the key thing is obviously experimenting and know when to switch, right? Like sometimes you can bang over your head with the same tools, but actually it doesn't actually solve the problems. Now you have a plethora of tools that we can choose. And I find that as long as you still rely on these so-called popular foundational models, actually any tools you can use, you can just switch, right?
Yeah.
There's no modes per se, right? Maybe.
Especially with large language models, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I think we've seen it every 2 months when I meet the team. Like, oh yeah, we ditched that one. So, Sonnet is doing better now. Like, what happened? Now we're not using that. Llama is doing better now. So it keeps on changing. It's hard to predict, but what's constant is that they will play a big role. Which LLM, it will be a combination of 2 or 3, maybe, I don't know. People will start realizing that when it comes to code, maybe Claude is better. When it comes to, I don't know, research and product manager work, maybe ChatGPT and OpenAI models are better. Mm-hmm. And I think eventually people will just stop experimenting too much and just trust that even if at a certain point one of your chosen models is lagging behind, 3 or 4 months later, it'll catch up eventually. So yeah. But hard to say, man. Even for founders like me building an AI developer tool, it's very hard to say where this is going to because there's so much hype right now.
Yeah.
So much hype, so much of initial trying and POCs, and we'll know in the next, I would say, 12 to 18 months, hopefully. But I do think that we're at the stage where in the next 12 to 18 months, a lot of startups are going to die. And then the winners will emerge and then people can focus on those 2 or 3.
So thanks for sharing all that, right? So I think one particular thing that I want to pick from this conversation as well, because you're kind of unique, right? You're building an application developer tools, right, from Southeast Asia for global markets. And I know this is one of your passion, right, building, I don't know, global solutions from Southeast Asia region. So tell us about, first of all, right, the promise of Southeast Asia region. Like, do you see the skill set here is capable enough to actually solve global problems? And what do you see the trend so far?
Yeah. I mean, I'm super passionate because I've been here 20 years, and I kind of decided I like to stay in Singapore and kind of make that chance that the Singapore maybe government took on me through a scholarship, make it worth it. There've been enough times in my career where I've heard from people that Southeast Asia does not have the talent, and I understand where it comes from, but how does talent actually start? I mean, India didn't have the engineering talent to build SaaS until Zoho built it against all the odds, and then now it's becoming a SaaS factory. And I've always believed that Southeast Asia needs the same. We don't have a lack of talent. We do have a lack of taking big bets, I would say. And the more I start understanding how the whole value chain works, it really comes down to risk capital, basically. The appetite for high risk moonshot projects, investing heavy amounts of money into it in the West, we just don't have it over here. So I think over here, as much as I believe in Southeast Asia being competitive, and we have talent from around the world, and stable government, and like founder friendly, I would say, terms through capital gains tax and everything, and just easy to do business, it's still, I would say, not where the hype machine is. But we do plan to, or at least hope to, change that. And there are companies like Superbase, Lottie that have origins over here, and there are ways of kind of being across two markets. So have your team in the US and Singapore and get access to the best of both worlds. But yeah, I mean, I think Southeast Asia has the ingredients. I think in the last 2 to 3 years, obviously the risk capital has dropped tremendously. That doesn't help any founders like us who want to change that from this part of the world. But yeah, I would say I'm quite positive about the future. Just how quickly it will happen and the role we can play into it remains to be seen. I do think we need, when it comes to investments, which any startup needs, I still think for building a developer tool or an AI company, you just have to go to the West. And that's been a realization lately that there's no point debating and no point like talking about what is the idealistic case. The reality is investors in this part of the world don't have the same maybe risk appetite or the background or the history. Otherwise, Figma would be built from here, OpenAI would be built from here. I don't think it's necessarily because of the talent, because we've had Singapore talent go to Silicon Valley and do well. And Silicon Valley also attracts talent. I mean, some of the best companies are being built by foreigners, but they go over there because they know there's an opportunity, not just that you get smarter by just being over there. If we have enough talent over here, we just need the right sort of balance in the ecosystem. And I think it's a work in progress.
Yeah. I think not to mention as well, when you mentioned about risk, kind of like a averse thing, right? So individuals themselves also probably take less bet. That we want like a more stable jobs, proper career and all that. So I think that mindset from individuals as well, I think might need to change. Yeah. So you mentioned about building dev tools kind of like difficult here. I know that we have many startups here that are turning into big as well, but yeah, they are solving more like, I don't know, like society problem, maybe business problems and all that. Why particularly building dev tools is not popular here? Is it like, I know, some trends or some mindset? Because we have talents, we have developers here building solutions as
I think
well.
Southeast Asia startup scene is now kind of going into the second wave, right? The first wave is generally communication, e-commerce, logistics, right? Fintech. It's just been a decade actually, not more than that. And I think now we have enough experienced engineering leaders and startup builders and operators who go and say, yeah, you know what, it was fun building Lazada, fun building Grab, and we learned a lot. But the real geeks will say, I want to go deeper. Yeah. What seemed impossible almost 5 years ago, building an app that you can show location on and like connect Stripe to it, today doesn't excite me anymore. I want to go deeper into either front end, back end, or anything that people are passionate about. I think 10 years ago, we just didn't have enough examples around us, enough investors, and enough, I think, experience in the operator side to go that deep into deep tech. Mm-hmm. I think that's changing now, which is why we have, I think in the last 5 years, I've seen maybe 7 or 8 developer tool companies come from this part of the world and eventually decided to move to Silicon Valley. Because you will have a reminder on a daily basis. Why are you over here? Why are you building from Singapore? just go where all the developers are, because one thing true about Silicon Valley is that the amount of early adopters and people who are willing to try something that's not yet perfect, the density in Silicon Valley is just insanely high, on the addition of obviously the risk capital that I talked about earlier. And I think that's why in Southeast Asia it's difficult, because I think the early adopters may exist, but it's a very, very small number. Like Indonesia, Southeast Asia, they generally tend to follow what's coming from the West. I don't think it's something that cannot change and will not change. It will. But we just need maybe 3 or 4 strong examples built from this part of the world to both attract more founders to solve these kind of problems, global problems and not just Southeast Asia problems, more deep tech problems than just on the application layer. And also will attract the right investors after we have some exits, I would say.
Yeah. So I think one example is definitely Locofy.ai, right? And yeah, and I know that you are, interestingly, a remote company, right? Fully remote company, and you have developers across different countries. So tell us, I think one problem for Southeast Asia is like how fragmented, the region are, right? So many different countries, different culture, different language, different norms, whatever that is, right? Different even like lifestyle and, rate of living, right? So tell us, like, what's the challenge here when you build fully remote company from Southeast Asia?
Yeah. So I think nature of the problem was such that we thought we don't necessarily have to be in the office, right? Like, because of COVID, I guess designers and engineers and product managers became very comfortable working with each other, as long as you have the right people you can trust. The bigger challenge was still that the early adopters of our product are still very much like around the world and not just in Southeast Asia. So today we are building from Singapore, but less than 5% of our revenue is from this part of the world. We were solving a global problem from day one, and we wanted to build from this part of the world because there's a lot of benefits. Like I've said, easy to start a company. We had background over here. Our first 10, 15 people we knew we wanted to work with were over here. But yeah, as the company matures a little bit and we start going into GTM, start going into fundraising, the challenge can be not just being remote, but being in this part of the world. And secondly, now we have people from all around the world. And if majority of the customers are going to be in the West, time zones can become a bit of a problem culturally. I think it's a little bit difficult to manage maybe more than 30 people remote than with 10 people. 10 people remote, we hung out every day. Wow. 30 people, sometimes we see people and I'm like, other than making them an offer, I don't remember talking to them. So the challenges will always be that, look, problems get solved much faster when you sit together, have a whiteboard, or sometimes online would take you 5 days, 6 days to get people to really get going, versus in person is just better that way. Selling to customers is generally better in person. But what works remotely very well is that our engineers are not spending any time in traffic. They're not living in expensive CBD areas to be closer to office, not just in Singapore, but in the 6, 7 markets we have our team members in. And they get the time to do more important things in life, right? Like there's no reason why you have to work 12 hours a day and miss out, like your kid goes to school and you don't get to see them at night, for example, right? And sometimes you just want to take a nap, 15-minute nap, and you get a productivity, like boost all of a sudden. Those kind of things I think is very, very hard to get in an office environment. And we've seen that people in our team appreciate that they can stay home. They're working hard as hell, but they don't miss out the important things in life, whether they are parents, whether it's taking care of their family, even walking their dog, for example, taking care of their health sometimes. I think, yeah, we are still very much going to try and keep it remote as long as possible. But as I was saying to you earlier, I've started now feeling, and some of the people in the team have started saying as well, that sometimes you just wish we were sitting in an office to solve this tougher problem. Sit in one room for a full day, we would have found a solution, whereas online can be a bit challenging that way. And also you have good days and bad days. And when you have bad days, it's easy to have a colleague who you can go down for a coffee with, went out and move on, versus being remote. I think sometimes no one even knows you're going through something. Yeah. So I think, yeah, it has its pros and cons, but it allows us to hire in every part of the world, which is a huge pro. And engineers and designers like the fact that they can be just in front of a laptop and not like spend 2 hours in the morning getting ready, getting to work, and then back. They would rather spend those 3, 4 hours a day doing other things outside of work and still get the productivity boost they need. Yeah.
Right. You mentioned that, interestingly, your customers starting to get, like you get it from not from this region, right? So tell us a little bit about the traction of Locofy so far. You have been around 4.5 years. What's the stage like? How much customers base, how much revenue you
Yeah. So we were in free beta for 3.5 years. And that helped us. And I mean, we did really well on Product Hunt and Indie Hackers, Twitter, like YouTube. People just kept making videos about us when they found out about us. TikTok went viral at one point. So we were lucky that we built a strong beta community rather. And when we monetized eventually last year, we had signs that enterprises and full stack engineers were actually where the strong product market fit lied. So we started charging our customers exactly a year ago. The first quarter, we started realizing the pricing was a little bit off here and there, and workshops were important, and we need to have a salesperson, the sales deck and everything. It takes time. It's only earlier this year we realized that we've gotten the pricing right, like not a seat-based model, but a usage-based model. And also pricing that doesn't push enterprises towards self-service, where we know they will struggle because there's no training available. But yeah, after we figured it out, it took us 9 months to get to our first million revenue. And now we're at a 1 year stage. We are just crossed 1.5. Our customers are mainly, actually, we've seen a strong product market fit with system integrators and agencies. Maybe because of the skill gap over there, maybe because of their own business model itself. It makes sense for them to be able to build faster and cheaper. And when it comes to the kind of enterprises other than system integrators and agencies, think of like companies like Toyota, Bupa, for example, insurance companies, banks, Security Bank, DBS, all these kind of large enterprises that have ambitions to be a tech company, but they don't necessarily attract the best software engineers. So Toyota attracts really good mechanical engineers and automobile engineers, but would the best Stanford, software engineer prefer to go to a Facebook or to Toyota, right? It doesn't mean that Toyota and the Bupas of the world don't have ambitions to, and they don't have the budgets to. But that's where we've seen strong product market fit, where they haven't been able to attract, the 10 out of 10 engineers maybe, but they're really good at what they do and they have ambitions to be a tech company. So that's why we've seen a strong product market fit. And when it comes to startups, we are working on a slightly simpler flow today to kind of circumvent the design optimization issues I mentioned to you earlier, and also to fit into the cursors of the world a little bit better. More UI-less, for example, go from 15 steps to just one step, where you can take your Figma design, run Locofy design models with just a click, and then immediately continue into cursor, for example, rather than adding more steps.
Congratulations for such a rapid, traction, revenue and all that. So for sure that I hope these tools will get more traction, because I believe it solves a real problem,
Yeah.
right? Especially for builders, right? For people who would like to build products, especially the, front-end web products, right? So we have covered a lot of things. Is there anything in particular that you think we missed or you want to also convey in this conversation?
Not particularly. I would say, no, man, I think we've covered.
Yeah. So as we wrap up our conversation today, Honey, I have one last question, which is like a tradition in my podcast. I call this the 3 technical leadership wisdom. So think of it just like advice you want to give to the listeners. Maybe if you can share a version from you today, that would be great.
I would say I will share what I follow myself. Otherwise, what's the point? I think number 1 is don't get too comfortable ever, especially if you're working in the tech industry. I think engineers, for a long time, they thought that they were invincible. And I think the last 3-4 years have been, I would say, humbling for a lot of us, product managers, engineers, designers. So always stay nimble, always keep learning. Like learning shouldn't stop after university. And I think you should, no matter how long you've been in the company, 10 years, 15 years today, your role is never safe. That's the reality. And if you keep working with that mentality that I will never get comfortable just because I've earned the right to be comfortable, I think you'll be fine. Waves will come, innovations will come and go, hype cycles will come and go. But if you are, don't box yourself to be just like, I'm a PWA guy or I'm a mobile app builder. Keep learning what's coming, what's new with technology. Don't fall in, obviously, for all the hype, but keep reinventing yourself. Like my co-founder, for example, went from being a gaming engineer to a mobile app engineer to then a PWA engineer and now an AI expert pretty much. And he's 40. Usually at this stage, you'll be like, I would be a line manager or I just manage some people and work on some tough problems. but I'm the Ruby on Rails guy, or I'm the backend guy, or I'm the AWS expert. So I think it's good to push yourself to become as close to being an expert as possible, but also don't box yourself in just this feeling of I've earned it. I've worked so many years on something. I'm an expert and I'm safe now and I can take it easy. That's just one of the things. So leadership and management are two different things. I believe in leadership, but not becoming like a line manager. I think 50% of the millions of people who've been fired in the last 3-4 years are actually those managers. So yeah, just always be an individual contributor, and of course, learn how to manage and learn how to lead teams and lead tough problems. Yeah, put yourself in a position where you cannot be boxed into just one thing and like that whole function or that role goes away. That would be number one. I would say don't be like, oh, you're a chief product officer and now I can just go to the next company and be chief product officer. I generally believe that we are living in a world where it's very different from how our parents grew up. Like in their generation, it was believed they will live until 70 maybe. And it was divided into 3 phases, right? The first 25 years to learn, next 25 years to earn by becoming an expert at something, and the next 25 years or 20 years to just retire based on what you earned. Now, as life expectancy has obviously changed tremendously and it will continue doing so, like to think you live until 90 or 100 is not considered crazy. And when that happens, whatever makes you an expert in your 30s will not be enough for you to continue until you're 60, 70. So I think it's important for people to start taking designated breaks, career breaks, to go and reinvent themselves, to always be hands-on to what I just said, and to never feel like, but I'm not an AI expert. When AI wave came, I didn't study AI in university, but we got our hands dirty, and you'll go through a period where you're uncomfortable, you feel lost, you feel like I'm just not young enough to learn. But you have to keep powering through because very quickly you'll become that expert that everyone wants you to be. And I think it applies to leaders more importantly than others because, yeah, you're not just in a team or in an organization for the quality of decision and the experience you bring in, but also for seeing it through. And the execution piece should never become like, hey, the last time I did something like this was 10 years ago, to stay relevant and to stay ahead of the curve as well. Yeah, be a problem solver. Technologies will come and go. But yeah, if you're too far away from the tech, then at some point of time, organizations will prefer younger, hungrier, and more adaptable graduates. So I think it's more, that's what mantra I follow. If that's the only advice I will give, I'll be happy with that as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very great reminder, especially for people who have been around for quite a number of years, right? So especially line managers or maybe leaders, right? So always gets your hand dirty, being hands-on, especially now, actually with AI tools, I feel as someone who have been around in the industry for quite some time, it's actually a powerful leverage. You can learn so much things quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and anything you can learn, right? So you can actually pick it up and, try it out and even write prototypes, code and all that. Because in the past, maybe the first hurdle is like the how.
Yeah.
We don't have the muscle to actually build something,
Correct.
know the know-how. But now I think AI can help us in the first step to actually build something and maybe iterate from there. So I think that's a very great reminder. So, Honey, if people would love to connect with you, learn more from you, learn more about Locofy, is there a place where they can find you online?
I'm on LinkedIn all the time. Other than that, I think my email address should actually be available on our website as well. But yeah, LinkedIn I would say would be the best place to find us or me, and then you can always book a call on our website where you book a demo or an exploration session with us, and more often than not, I will be on that call. Yeah.
Right. So again, thank you for sharing about Locofy today. I'm sure many engineers or designers who are hearing this conversation will be very excited, and I hope they try out your tools. And yeah, all the best for the journey.
Thanks for having me, man. This is a great conversation. Appreciate you having me on the podcast as well. Yeah.